let's get started. Last but certainly not least is thank you to our event sponsors, both Business Health Trust, we're so glad to be able to produce these, and Reach King County, which focuses on retention expansion for King County businesses. Andy, I will turn it over to you.
Well, delightful. Thank you so much, Sarai. And I'd like to thank everyone for being here. I feel very honored to have been asked by the Chamber to come to you and share some thoughts and ideas on how we engage in some of these interpersonal interactions in our business settings that can present very unique challenges. This is such a timely topic, as Sarai had mentioned, and further, I'd say that in my lifetime, and I'm in my early 50s now, I can't recall a period where human beings were so polarized, and certainly in care and systems settings and in public safety settings, we're seeing within the data that we collect events and a frequency of responses to behavioral crisis events. We have ways of coding that and capturing data in the variety of care and systems and public safety systems that we utilize to engage those events and support those events. For me personally, I'm describing it as an empathy crisis, and this mode of interpersonally interacting with the public is kind of new for me. So I'm being forthcoming when I'm saying right now that I'm feeling a little vulnerable because I know I have something to say, but generally my experience has been working in very, very private training settings with public safety personnel, behavioral healthcare professionals, and engaging in modes of conferring this information in a more formal and quite frankly, longer period of time setting than an hour. So when I was approached by the Chamber with the charge of essentially raising the awareness of the membership and of our community with strategies and tips on how we can do this, I initially experienced the request with some trepidation because I have a longstanding history of doing this in a way that's very committed. And I've never had to confer this kind of information in an hour. So before I said yes, which didn't take that long because the need for this kind of information is so significant, I did go through the mental operation, if you will, of identifying within what I do, what are the things that this kind of audience could derive the most meaning and value from. And what you're about to walk through with me for an hour represents that. So without any further ado, I'm going to jump right into a slide deck that will help me sequence that material for you. And I look forward to your questions. Unfortunately, I don't have more time with you. I wish I had more time, but I have an hour to make an impact. And frankly, I think I'm going to get there to the extent that you'll have curiosity about more. So I look forward to that. Let's get started. I'm not going to spend a lot of time developing my background. Suffice it to say, I'm a credible subject matter expert nationally and at the global level about this stuff. I've spent a considerable amount of time professionally, both in large systems of care and in public safety settings, engaging in these events in a professional response capacity, in a training capacity, in a program administrative capacity. And I have a particular worldview on this stuff that is derived from experience in all of those areas. So with that, we are going to do a high-speed flyover of what we can refer to as best practices in crisis de-escalation. And we've identified some objectives with this webinar. This isn't a training. If it were a training, we would be spending a lot more time together, and I would be working with you individually, one at a time, in the conferral of understanding and competencies. We don't have that opportunity. So the best we can hope for, I think, is to raise awareness. And if we had to identify what are the things that are important that our awareness should be raised about, it would be these. We'd like to raise your awareness in the neurobiology and physiology of threat, anger, and violence. We'd like to raise your awareness in the responsibility that we all have as human beings towards self-regulation. And I'll explain what that means in greater detail. We'd like to raise your awareness about 3 conditions that in research and data collection precede assaultive behavior most often. There are 3 conditions that precede some kind of crisis or aversive interaction between 2 human beings more than any other. We'd like to raise your awareness on thinking and language in the context of de-escalation tips. Again, I can't confer language competencies as much as I'd like to. I can only raise your awareness. But if you fade into this stuff, into the lecture, I'm confident that many of you are going to be able to derive value in these tips and put them to work right away. And then ultimately to reframe what power and control look like in managing these kinds of events, where someone presenting discontrol or dysregulation creates an experience in the person observing that some kind of control of the situation needs to be established. So there are going to be some givens that I'm going to ask you to consider in the next 45 minutes. Here are the givens. I could make 100 research citations for you and direct you to the papers on all of the content that we are going to discuss in the next 45 minutes, or essentially I'm going to discuss. And I don't have the opportunity to do that now. I don't have a lot of opportunity in this short period of time to give you the why it works, why we know it works, why it's predictable. We're going to ask you nonetheless to suspend the need to have that information because of the restrictions around how we're doing this. And there will be ways that you can explore this either with me or on your own later that we will get to. So here are the givens. What we're about to move through is anchored in social learning theory and evidence-based research in interpersonal interactions with people served who present discontrol, dysregulation, anger, aggression, and violence. This isn't just my opinion. The basis of a lot of this content is expressed in meaningful trainings throughout the United States. In many cases, I'm a part of some of these initiatives, either at the thought leader level or the direct provision level. It shouldn't be any surprise to most people, particularly people who engage in services to the public, that we can distinguish when someone is presenting anger, aggression, or acting from a state of their sympathetic nervous system, central nervous system, limbic brain, reptilian brain, fight, flight response. You've probably heard all of these terms. For our purposes, we're going to distinguish neurobiological function into 2 primary categories. And I'm going to use terms that are meant to describe older and more contemporary, the primitive brain and the evolved brain. All that is meant definitionally of primitive brain is very old. You've heard these terms in medicine before, more than likely. The primitive brain, the limbic system, the fight-flight system is something that all human beings have with them. It's what is responsible for our existence as a species. We're able to identify threat and, quite simply put, experiences of anger and aggression are anchored in these anatomical structures when we measure them with functional MRI scanning. If we were to put a special medical helmet on one's head and created conditions where someone was feeling afraid or feeling anger, we would see in the medical imagery of that helmet played out on a screen, parts of the brain, physical parts of the brain lighting up. So what we're here to tell you is that when we're experiencing fear and aggression, this part of the brain, the limbic system or the primitive brain, is very busy with activity. When people are in a state of rest, social engagement, happiness, feeling okay, we see in the imagery that area of the brain less busy, and we see the evolved part of the brain, which came much, much later in evolution. We see that far more active with activity. Quick note for those who are interested, extensive mapping about this can be found in the work of Dr. Stephen Porges, Porges, who is a founder of polyvagal theory, Polyvagal theory. The more that we can function in our evolved brain and in a state of okayness and confidence and peace, the more we can anatomically rely on diversity of thought, lots of options. When our limbic brain is active, when someone is experiencing fear or anger and aggression, that evolution and diversity of thought diminishes. You've heard expressions about this, people getting tunnel vision under stress. These are expressions of the primitive brain and the limbic system. You've heard about respiration increasing, heart rate increasing, like I had shared at the beginning of this webinar, the daunting task of conferring this information in an hour. That's if there were a functional MRI helmet on me, as I was talking about that, you would see parts of my limbic brain lighting up on a screen. And right now you'd see that a lot less because I'm not feeling that anymore. Because like any musician may tell you, they're nervous before their concert, and then as soon as they touch the keyboard or pluck the string, that seems to go away, and then the music takes over. So the music is taking over for me now. So I could talk about this for minimally 4 hours. We don't have that time. I'm going to ask you to take away from this 2 anatomical structures, the primitive brain and the evolved brain. In the primitive brain, fear, anger, aggression, disrespect, shame, feeling out of control, that lights up. Peace, interpersonal engagement, feeling okay, confident, evolved brain, wider diversity of thought and expression. That's step 1. This is how the brain works in the context of behavior. Okay. This is an important fundamental, because now we're going to talk about why being in the evolved brain is so very important. We are here fundamentally to discuss these very challenging interactions that we have in our places of business. Where one falls on the issue is not the point of this hour. How passionate one feels about COVID safety measures or opposed to COVID safety measures is not the point in this hour. How do we engage these events in the messaging about COVID safety measures in a way that is meaningful, effective, and reduces risk to the person carrying that message is a fundamental goal of this webinar. The conversation around this topic is the goal of this webinar. That's what we're here to help with. So let's talk about why this word, the lighthouse, is in front of you. We can tell you definitively that the people who are most meaningful and effective in de-escalation are people who present from a completely regulated state. What does that mean? It means that their presentation and affect and appearance is one of being in their evolved brain. Well, how does somebody get there? How does somebody do that in the presence of things that can present risk, of things that can push the buttons for fear and anger or shame? Suffice it to say, we don't have enough time to get into that. The big takeaway that we would want you to grab from this is that those states are acquirable. They are acquirable by growing awareness of how your body works, by engaging in practices that would be in the category of wellness that enhance your ability to be completely regulated between these crisis events, so that when the crisis event comes, you are less prone to slide down the ladder into your own limbic brain state. So the best allegory that we have to confer awareness of being self-regulated is this idea of a lighthouse. If you haven't figured out from my accent, I'm not from around here. I'm from the New York metropolitan area. I came out here in 2003. I saw Mount Rainier and I never went back. All I really miss is the pizza and the calzone and the meatball sandwiches. I love being in the Pacific Northwest. And in being here and being captivated by this part of the country, I've developed a passion for boating. I live on an island in the Puget Sound. My family has an old trawler, and we love going all over the Puget Sound to the variety of destinations that we have here. And as I began to learn about boats, because, you know, when you're from the New York metropolitan area, most people don't know too much about boats out there. As I began to learn about boats and navigation and aids to navigation, I certainly knew what a lighthouse was until I moved out here, but there were attributes of aids to navigation that I became familiar with. So when I learned more about that and thought about what I do, this just seemed to emerge as a meaningful allegory. A lighthouse is an aid to navigation. It enables ships in the harbor, vessels in the harbor, to navigate safely, reliably, to a safe place, a safe port, a safe harbor. The lighthouse constantly projects light that is uninterrupted from it. It may be interrupted by environmental blockage, a wave, a storm, a cloud, but it always projects one way. It also is anchored on the earth. It doesn't move. Storms break around it. It doesn't move. It continues to project one way. What we are proposing in engaging interpersonal interactions when someone is a boat in the harbor, you are the solid anchor, the solid anchored lighthouse to which someone in dysregulation can navigate. You project self-regulation. There are neurobiological reasons why this works. I wish I had more time to talk about the research that we've done about that because it's profound. Suffice it to say, imagine a lighthouse that were not anchored on the earth, but was a floating dock, and it constantly moved with the tide and the current, like these vessels in the harbor. How would the vessels in the harbor get anywhere? Trying to move to a lighthouse that's constantly moving. It would be impossible. A state of self-regulation is a state like a lighthouse. It is unmoved, and it is the thing that the person in the harbor who's dealing with tide, current, weather, storm must navigate to. So in whatever way after this hour you can pursue states of being that enable you to be like a lighthouse, so the needle on your stereo receiver doesn't move with the strong signal and noise, but is stable. That's the place to be. Now, I'm sure you have seen countless interpersonal interactions with people arguing. People arguing is an expression of both people being out in the harbor. One of them ain't a lighthouse. When you have to engage someone who's presenting anger, aggression, violence, if you are corresponding to them in their emotional state by an unstable emotional state yourself, this is not going to go as well as opposed to you projecting and truly being as solidly moored and anchored as you possibly can be. It's the best way for me to describe it. And if I had a day, I'd give you all of the biological and neurological why. Be the lighthouse. There are 3 common conditions that precede assault more than any other. Tons of research about it. That's for another time. Getting someone to do something that they don't want to do. Getting someone to stop doing something that they want to keep doing. And having to say no. Those 3 conditions, when they occur, can result in assaultive behavior more than any other. Knowing that when approaching a customer who might not be wearing a mask and you have to engage in an activity demand, getting someone to do something that they don't want to do, there are going to be ways that I show you in the next few slides on how to do that in a way that can yield you potentially the greatest opportunity at success. Having to say no, same condition. Getting someone to stop doing something they want to keep doing. Let's say someone is in your store carrying on and on about how they don't need to wear a mask, how they don't have to produce vaccination proof. And you have to get this person to stop blowing up the showroom. Where you stand on the issue is not the point. How to engage in a conversation where the outcome is humane, that it honors diversity of thought and expression, and renders the most influence. That's my job today. So remember these 3. This is the light on the dashboard. If you have to move into position to get someone to do something they don't want to do, get someone to stop doing something they want to keep doing, or have to say no, these are the highest risk conditions that can precede assaultive behavior. We want you to be aware of these. I have essentially 20 to 25 minutes to give you some tips on how to engage these events. I'm going to do my best. I had to think of allegories that describe a number of social learning ideas, dialectic behavior therapy ideas, cognitive behavior therapy ideas, de-escalation best practices. So I'm going to give you a couple that I think grab a lot of them. We talked a little bit about the primitive brain and the evolved brain. We talked about the lighthouse and what that means. Let's talk for a minute about the problem isn't the problem. In public safety, particularly, in the response to behavioral crisis disciplines, particularly, very often people charged with those responsibilities and who have those duties can fall into the trap of thinking that we must fix the problem that the person is complaining about in order for them to be okay, in order to get them to de-escalate. That's not what we do. That's a huge responsibility. So you're going to respond to a stranger who's going to identify the reason that they are in crisis in such a way and saddle you with trying to fix that in order to be okay. What sense does that make? That's not our job. If we can assist someone in getting to a state of self-regulation so they have the freedom and the opportunity to fix that problem with our help, now that's something we can do. Their problem is not the problem that we're there to fix. Our responsibility is to engage this person with as much influence and opportunity to confer self-regulation in a way that reduces the likelihood of future emergency. Well, what's that mean? Wouldn't it be interesting? Think about this for a moment. I come from a career field. One moment. Could you handle him, honey? Thank you. The Chihuahua, by the way, I can never de-escalate. It doesn't work. He is constant limbic brain all the time. He eats and he barks, and that's it. And I love him. I come from a career world, a professional world that for a very, very long time, the way that we manage people prone to discontrol and dysregulation is to contain the event, in some cases physically, and isolate it. In jails and prisons across the United States, you've probably heard a lot of talk about what's happening with segregation or intensive management or seclusion or isolation. Here's what we know from the data. That doesn't change behavior at all. Doesn't teach someone anything, doesn't learn them. It doesn't do anything other than isolate the crisis. What if we could, in the presentation of someone's emergency, intervene in such a way where we reduce the likelihood of that person engaging in the same behavior later? You mean there's research that says that can be done? Yeah. You haven't done that. Yeah, I have. Yeah. And so have countless others. If we meet the presentation of crisis with tactics that are oriented toward reducing the likelihood of future emergency as opposed to just crushing it, we actually make the world a better place. I liberate myself from the burden of fixing someone else's problem that they claim is responsible for their de-escalation and focus on the real problem of assisting this person in such a way where the way that I did it is actually something they can derive meaning from after the event. This is how we move people in psychiatric care and services from very, very concerning behaviors to reintegration to the community. We can actually do that in how we address the problem. So what's the takeaway from this slide in the 1 hour de-escalation fighter jet plane we're in together? The person putting the mask on, the person not producing the proof, the person blowing up your lobby, you're responding to that event. But the thing that they're claiming is responsible for their ire is not the thing you're there to fix. You're there to manage the dysregulation in the moment in a way that results in the most influence and the most reduced risk of a safety problem. That's what we can do. And it's a pitfall. We do it with our kids. I'm coming back to this for a minute. We do it with our kids all the time. The kid reports this is the source of their difficulty. We fix that problem, make it go away for them. They're okay again. One way of describing that behavior could be enabling. What if I help my kid manage this problem in such a way where they did not routinely have to come to me for help? You can do that with people prone to violence. Yeah. You can do that with people that have agendas. Yeah. Yeah, this is doable. This happens. Okay. I can't spend a lot of time developing why. I can only make the recommendation. On any occasion, we all do it. We all do this. It takes discipline and practice to weed this out of the vocabulary. Take "I need you to" out of your vocabulary. Get it out. I need you to back up. I need you to put a mask on. I need you to lower your voice. I need you to slow down. I need you to hold that door open. Get "I need you to" out. This is an invitation to limbic system activity. You mean there's data? Yes, enough. Yes, there is. Get it out. "I need you to" statements got to go away. Identify the desired behavior that you want to pursue with the person that you're engaging and describe how it serves them. I'm going to show you how to do that. "I need you to" statements or "you need to" statements, those are equally non-constructive. You need to back up. You need to lower your voice. You need to talk to me with respect. Get rid of the "need you to" statements. I'm going to show you a different way to language it that's simply more effective and will get you the desired outcome more frequently. It's been counted. It's in the data. The jury's back. There's no more discussion about it. "I need you to" statements are not as effective as other ways. Let's talk about pre-contact cues and revising habituated statements. What are habituated statements? So I'm going to use Lee's name because Lee is here in the webinar and I see Lee on the little strip of faces here. Lee, I hear you asking me for money for a bus ticket. Unfortunately, the staff can't give money out. Unfortunately is a word that I generally use on a habit basis before citing a rule. Habituated unfortunately's and buts, we want you to be aware of them. We want you to be aware of language that is used on the basis of habit as opposed to deliberate. What's another way to address Lee's request for money for a bus ticket? "Hey, Lee, I hear you asking me for money for a bus ticket. The policy here is that funds for transportation of residents is provided through this request process. If you fill out this form, I'm happy to have it processed for you." Unfortunately or but is generally a word that precedes in the neuroscience literature a goal being blocked or an expectation being violated. Unfortunately is the equivalent of saying the bad news is coming. You know, I'd love to help you out, but I'd love to help you with this, but unfortunately, okay, you're already taking electric current and sending it right into the limbic system of the person you're doing it with. Get unfortunately's and buts out. If you want to issue a statement in response to a request where you may have to deny one of the three conditions I mentioned earlier, denying a request, we would validate the request by accurately reflecting it. I hear you asking me for money for a bus ticket. And then I would refer to the policy, rule, or shared value without any preface that could stimulate the limbic system of the person I'm talking to. I would just state the rule purely. I hear you asking me for money for a bus ticket. The policy here is that employees are unable to provide personal funds in the transportation needs of the residents. If you'd like to fill out this form, I'd be happy to pursue that process with you. Wow, the time's flying. Maybe you've heard the expression trauma-informed care. You see it in the news, you hear it in television shows. Trauma. Everyone is identifying trauma. There are a number of ways that we define trauma and define environments that work best for people who are recovering and healing from trauma. If there were a single quote that encapsulates the spirit of trauma-informed care and encapsulates the spirit of interacting with human beings in such a way that we don't throw gas on the fire of their trauma intentionally or unintentionally, would be this simple quote: be humble around trauma. Trauma shows up as anger. Trauma shows up as aggression. Trauma shows up as violence. You mean to tell me be humble around someone getting angry and saying disrespectful things? Yeah. But they don't deserve that. It ain't about what they deserve. It's about you rendering the most influence in this situation to gain cooperation or collaboration and to reduce your risk of injury from assault. If we're humble around trauma, you're doing the most meaningful thing you can do for another human being, and you're reinforcing your own capacity for self-regulation. I don't need someone to respect me. I have self-respect. When someone tells me to go F myself, when someone makes fun of me, those are horrible things. But it's going to be a lot more difficult to change the world of every interaction that happens that causes me to feel that way than dealing with what I can manage and control in me, rendering those forces innocuous. Be humble around trauma. Okay, you ready? This is it. This is a 4-step thinking and languaging sequence that has neurobiological anchors and social learning anchors. In the work that we do with public safety professionals and behavioral healthcare personnel across the world, we move them through a process that they can practice that essentially does these 4 things. Issue a validation statement. That communicates to the person that they are seen, heard, and understood. What if I don't like him? Don't matter. You have an objective here. You got to get this person to leave the store because he won't put a mask on, for example. I see you not wearing a mask. How many times have you seen in the media people go into fisticuffs because a store employee walks up to someone and says, you need to put a mask on, and then they get punched in the face? There should be no surprise why. Neurobiologically, what just happened is that this person imposed their will in such a way that a cattle prod went right into the limbic system of the person served and shocked them. A fight-flight response was created, and as a result, they got punched. I'm not saying that that's right. I'm saying that neurobiologically, that's what's happening. What if it was this? I see you're not wearing a mask. I see you, I hear you, I understand you. Now, without an unfortunately or a but, I'm going to refer to a policy, rule, law, or shared value system. Why? I have to reframe this interaction from them versus me to, whoa, 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 whoa. This is not about you and me. This is about you and a shared value system, you and a law, you and a mandate, you and a governor's directive, you and a statute, you and safety, you and community. Ain't about you and me. This stimulates the evolved brain. Propose a choice, like suggesting the desirable course of action and describe how it serves them. I see your problem. Problem is not about you and me. It's about you and this shared value system. Propose a choice. If you follow this course of action, describe a desirable outcome. Here's how it can serve you. Go F myself? Okay, so it sounds like you're still having difficulty with this. This rule hasn't changed. I feel confident that if you pursue this alternative, here's how it's going to serve you. I will show you 2 or 3 examples off the cuff of what this can look like. Kids playing Xbox instead of doing their homework. Hey, honey, I see that you're enjoying your leisure activity. The rule in our home is that we do all of our responsibilities with school before we enjoy leisure activities. P, propose a choice. If you go do your homework now, D, you'll be able to come back to your Xbox and enjoy it for the rest of the evening. That's a lot different than stop what you're doing, go do your homework. Yeah, but that's shorter. But that doesn't reduce the likelihood of future emergency. Well, that's your opinion. No, it's not. I got thousands of pages I can refer you to with this. Person doesn't want to take court-ordered medication after they've been admitted to an acute care psychiatric setting. They live with schizoaffective disorder. they're being aggressive, they're busting the place up, and you have to confront this person who could be very larger than you and tell them they have to get a shot. I totally hear you, and I appreciate that you don't want to take this medication. There's a court order requiring its administration. If you cooperate with the court order, here's how this can serve you in the progress notes, and it might help you at your next hearing. That's a lot different than walking over to someone and saying, you got to take the shot or we're going to hold you down and give it to you. Which one do you think yields the most cooperation? Another example. Good afternoon. I see that you're in the lobby area without a mask. There's a mandate requiring that access to the store contemplates that all customers wear a mask. If you put your mask on, you'll be able to come into the store. Screw you, I ain't doing it, this, that, and the other thing. It sounds like you're making absolutely clear that you're not going to come into the store unless you violate the mandate. The mandate applies to our business, the employees, and all of the people that we serve. If you come into the store in violation of these COVID restrictions or safety rules, and it depends on your place of business. It depends on policies associated to what's going to happen next. That's the policy we would ask you to refer to. It might be that someone's going to be asked to leave. It might be that a phone call, some kind of reporting mechanism needs to be initiated. It might mean loss control engages in a show of support to influence the situation in a way that ends. That's your R. I see that you're not wearing a mask. There's a policy, rule, or law surrounding that they are donned. If you don the mask at this time, you'll be able to come into the store and do what you want. Well, I don't want to do that. If you have alternatives within your place of business to that, maybe in some occasions, people bring merchandise outside to give it to the customer. I really don't know. There are so many businesses in here and so many rules. The value set around this mechanism is to issue the validation associated to seeing and conferring understanding in the moment to the person who's engaging in the problem. The referral reframes the interaction. This is not about you and me. This is about you and a shared value system. If you follow this course of action, here's how it will serve you. In our trainings on this method, what this does is bring order and structure to someone's chaos. Remember, when the limbic brain is active, when the primitive brain is busy, diversity of thought and diversity of expression are diminished. People can't conceive of their own solutions as readily as they can when they're fully an evolved brain. When we propose a choice and describe how it serves them, we're assisting them to re-engage their evolved brain state. Because generally speaking, people are not receiving that message well about COVID safety. And it can result in very, very aversive interaction. You're the lighthouse, you're issuing validation. You're not making this about you and them. This is about them in a shared value system. You're the messenger. You're proposing a course of action and you're describing how it serves them. Here are 4 additional techniques that are anchored in the research that you'll find very helpful. I won't spend a lot of time defining each one, but there's one I want to spend a few moments on. The positive verbal is a positive appraisal of appropriate behavior. We do this in social learning to reinforce adaptive learned behaviors that enable someone to move from an involuntary setting to a voluntary setting to community. Great job doing your homework. You got to wait till the behavior's done first. Thanks for keeping your voice at a respectable volume. I really appreciate it. Great job cleaning your room. These things brought to a number assist people in moving to more and more increased social functioning. They work geometrically well with nonverbals. So it's the verbal the positive verbal and a positive nonverbal. The thumbs up, the pat on the shoulder. Great job. The positive prompt. This is a description of a desirable outcome. This is the if-then statement. When you go to class, you earn credit. If you work at an employer, you earn a paycheck. When you clean your room, you'll be able to enjoy the leisure activity. Positive prompts are a description of a desirable outcome. What happens if you have to give the bad news? What happens if you have to set the limit, deny the request, or demand the activity in such a way where now you're going to have to describe a negative consequence? It's always followed with a description of a desirable outcome. If you have to let someone know that something's going to happen if they continue on this course of behavior that's destructive, we want the last thing they hear from you to be the thing we want them to do. So we're changing and reframing stop or else with, if you continue to engage in dropping racial slurs in the common area, destroying property, throwing these things around, telling everyone to go F themselves, the following things are going to happen to bring that to an end. However, if you engage in this alternative behavior right now, you'll have an opportunity to stay. Not my invention. When you follow that sequence, you render more influence than just this. And isn't it interesting? I mentioned habituated language earlier. How often we will use stop or else languaging in our homes with our kids and our other family members and friends without following it with a description of a desirable outcome. So with that, that's me. You can learn more about this work in a certification capacity from the National Anger Management Association. Here's some contact information for me, where you have my email, my LinkedIn. I have Instagram, where I put up tips every day. And I also have a podcast that's on all the platforms called Snakes in the Garden, which speaks to this stuff. And there'll be an enterprise. The switch will be flipped on it in January, where there will be access to lots of trainings and community information on crisis intervention and de-escalation. And that's about the fastest period of time I've ever dedicated to this kind of stuff. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to do it. I hope that no one was put off or offended by the way that I present. My intent is to really confer some meaningfulness to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. As you said, you went through what would normally be an in-person training, really in depth in a short period of time, and we appreciate that. And thank you for giving us that information, but also just bringing our awareness to some of the strategies and some of the things that we as employers can also be doing and thinking about how to further equip our staff in all of this world as well. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. Andy is willing to stick around for a little bit longer to answer questions. And again, as a reminder that this webinar was recorded and will be on the Seattle Metro Chamber of Commerce webpage later today or tomorrow. You will be getting an email with a link to that as well. So be on the lookout there. With that, thank you very much to you, Andy, for coming, and to the Seattle Chamber for putting this webinar on. We'll start going through some questions, and if you need to log off, please visit the recording later to get some of the questions answered. So first question, if you encounter someone who's obviously under the influence of a substance, does this change your tactics at all? Oh, I think you're muted, Andy.
I'm sorry. It doesn't change what I do, but it changes my expectation on how long this is going to take. Because generally speaking, someone who's influenced by polysubstance, let's just call it the whole spectrum, you're dealing with biological influence in a way where someone's capacity to be fully attentive and to derive everything that you're trying to communicate becomes very limited or restricted. So just plan on what might take 30 seconds, taking 10 minutes. It's the best way for me to answer that one. What's the next one?
Is there a length of time after which interactions get riskier, say after 3 minutes or 5 minutes, or that chances of success go down?
Well, there are other variables in that problem. I've certainly been involved in personally and seen de-escalation efforts that go on for 45 minutes, get to the objective. I can also share with you that a perfunctory response that's repeated without adapting, you're doing the same thing over and over and it's not getting anywhere. If you're not adapting your strategy, and as a result, it's not unusual for conditions to deteriorate. I will tell you an interesting research outcome. You know, for years, anger management ideology recommended beating up a pillow or engaging in long-winded expressions of release in the interest of being therapeutic. The jury is back on that, and it doesn't help someone develop a capacity to manage and adapt and sublimate their anger to a more constructive path. So venting, letting someone go off about a subject for 45 minutes, generally speaking, not good. So that would be the best way for me to answer that question in the moment.
Could you coach us through a few more scenarios, specifically around if you need to ask someone to leave? You know, I'm thinking also in the context of masks right now, as King County has the mandate.
Yep. I can give it to you in an IRPD, and this is going to be on YouTube. So don't feel like you got to bust out your camera and film me doing this, because in a short period of time, you can watch this later. I think I'm right, Sarai? That's going to be on. Okay. Mm-hmm. So getting someone to leave who won't put their mask on could be performed this way. Hey, sir, for the past 5 minutes, I've brought to your attention the requirement that customers have masks on in this setting. The mandate and the law and the store policy requires our customers to be masked. If you continue to stay in this store unmasked, this is going to necessitate that I make a phone call to public safety, and you could be asked to leave in a very visible way. However, if you put your mask on now, or if you choose to leave the store of your own volition, you'll be able to enjoy the rest of your day without any interruption from us, and we'd appreciate that you do that. Now, even if he tells you to F off as he's exiting the store, you won. And what I mean by that specifically is that you conferred and communicated in a non-offensive way an opportunity for this person to make a choice, because in that millisecond, they considered those two. And you sequenced them with, I'm either going to be potentially contacted by some kind of enforcement mechanism, or I can maintain my freedom by leaving right now. That's what you're implying in that approach. Mm-hmm. If I had an hour, we could play with this endlessly, and I absolutely know you would walk away from this feeling more confident. I know you would. And I wish we had more time. Feel free to get in touch with me offline. We can talk about that.
Great. What suggestions do you have for the staff member who gets angry in a situation? And, you know, how might other staff members help support or take over in an appropriate way, you know, or how does someone ask for help? Be like, I'm getting worked up here.
I got it. So this is not unusual. This happens. It happens in hospitals. It happens in public safety agencies, where you'll have that one person whose manner and approach in the math can make things worse. First, I would say that that's a supervision or leadership issue. And what I mean by that is, this has been written. The measure of any organization, the culture of any organization, is measured by the worst behavior the leadership is willing to tolerate. If you have a person engaging in behavior on your team that's making conditions unsafe and worse for the rest of the workforce, first, I'll say that responsibility rests with the leadership of the organization. That's number one. Number two, how do you deal with that in the meantime? Number one, I would consider the possibility of providing some feedback to this person as a group in a non-shaming way. We'd like to feed back to you that when you're terse or very abrupt with a person not wearing a mask because we know how passionate you are about it. The concern here is that we're creating crisis in the store, and we're learning about other ways to language to get the desired outcome in a way that could create less stress and result in a reduced likelihood of emergency. Would you be willing to talk with us about that? No, I ain't doing it. Well, now you got to go to your supervisor and say, this is a problem. And people are getting hurt over this stuff, guys. They're getting hurt over how these conversations happen. And invariably, what's in these discussions is, I need you two statements. You need two statements. Unfortunately, statements and but statements. Get them out. Get those out of your vocabulary when it comes to this stuff.
Great. That's really helpful to kind of walk through that. One last question is, if you suspect mental health issue is contributing, how might you approach things differently, or do you need to?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily change the approach. I would be mindful that if there is mental health component, and Sarai, I want to get to Tammy's question when we're done with this. Okay. Is Tracy's here? Tracy Grunfelder is here. Oh my gosh. Hey, Trace. And Tammy's here. So it's very hard if you don't. First of all, I'm managing two questions at once. Sarai, just refresh me because my brain moves really fast. What was the thing that I was just answering right now?
Just talking about if mental health, if you suspect
mental health. Okay, yeah. So ask your employer to provide mental health first aid. It's a very short, meaningful way to engage in heightened awareness about what to do when someone presents the presentation of living with mental illness. And that kind of information can be very helpful in setting expectations for yourself. So next, lots of comments. These rules and policies are not laws. They don't have to adhere to them. If you don't have a rule or policy to refer to a shared value. What are some shared values that people can connect with, even if there are no laws? One of the hardest de-escalations I had to do was to preserve the well-being of a youth when a parent that was a beneficiary of significant evidence that was engaged in abuse, and we as a medical group responding to an event had no real statutory ability to prevent contact between the parent and the kid, but we had very, very good reason to in the moment. The police weren't there yet. They do that. We don't do that as EMS. So how do you do that? You start thinking about shared values real fast. You start thinking about things that both of you can connect on, like safety, truth, well-being, meaningfulness, connection, community. Start thinking about shared values you can refer to that enable this person to adapt their behavior for another objective down the road. So the referral to the mom in this case was, hey, we know, and you've made absolutely clear that you want to remove your daughter from the scene in the middle of the delivery of medical care, and we appreciate that you have that right. Law enforcement is responding right now, and they're going to process this scene in the context of a potential investigation. You have an opportunity, if your claim is accurate, to prove that in a way where you can be free of the investigation pretty quickly. We would suggest that you cooperate with what we're doing, and in that way, you'll be able to leave the scene with your kid in such a way that there'll be no more ongoing law enforcement involvement. Yeah, and so that's where the mother,
commonality and kind of referring to something even beyond the law or, whatever that is.
The shared value in this case was cooperation and truth, right?
Yeah.
So
that's great. Well, we don't have any additional questions in the Q&A box. So we will end this program here. Again, thank you to our interpreters, to Andy, and to the Seattle Metro Chamber of Commerce, who is really trying to equip the employer community and all of us in the region to be able to deal with the situations we face ourselves in. If you are an employer and looking for more resources, this Andy is a great resource to reach back out to, and also check out and be on the lookout for possibly more trainings from the Seattle Metro Chamber as well on this topic. So take care and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Take care all. Be safe. Be well.